because it's worth reading. I can tell you, it just amazed me. And so it's in this book by Dr. Jeremiah, and he talks about handwriting on the wall. You remember that happened to the king there in Babylon,
Yeah.
and he didn't know what it said. Of course, Daniel was the one that interpreted. Most of these little stories you heard when you were in nursery or in Bible school or church. But anyway, I've always heard that if you wanted to study Revelation, you really needed to study Daniel. A lot of people, and I've always heard that, but I've never really compared. But that's one reason I wanted you to read it. Book, because it's all 20 chapters in the book of Daniel. And it starts out whenever Daniel, Hananiah, Michael, and Jehovah were in Judah. And the king in Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, you probably remember Nebuchadnezzar, mean king. But anyway, he was just sort of came out of nowhere, it seemed like. And the king there in Judah, his name was Jehoiakim, and he just, he was really hearing some wonderful things about Nebuchadnezzar and what Babylonia was doing. But Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, you remember Jeremiah? And I finally realized why he was called the weeping prophet. I tell you, if you read Jeremiah, that poor man, everything God asked him to do, I wonder if any one of us today could have done it. It was just amazing, just awful things. But what he was trying to do, God, was illustrate to the Israelites that they better pay attention because they were going off and worshiping other gods and everything. And he used Daniel in the most awful places. Once he had to lay naked for how many days? And then he would turn over on one side, and he ate such terrible stuff. It was awful. But every time God said, do it. Jeremiah did it. And so he told the king, Nebuchadnezzar, he said, don't make an alliance with Babylon because this king, it's going to be really bad for you if you do. Well, Jehoiakim already made up his mind that he was interested in Babylon. They just sort of seemed to raise up overnight, and he wanted to find out what they were doing. It was so wonderful. Well, Jeremiah kept saying, don't do it. Well, finally, Jehoiakim had Jeremiah thrown in prison, so he got him out of the way, and he went ahead and formed an alliance with Nebuchadnezzar. And what he was wanting to do, he was planning on completely devastating Jerusalem and Judah and this whole mess. But first, he had to go in and find all the brilliant students in the schools there in Judah, Jerusalem. He wanted to get the smartest kids. They had to have at least a 4.0 average in wherever they were in school. And I don't really know the ages when you go from one school to a university, but anyway, Daniel was about 15 and a half years old. He was one of the youngest, and they found 70 smart men had this 4.0 average, and so Nebuchadnezzar was smart enough to say, we're going to bring every one of those young people out before we completely destroy Jerusalem, and I'm going to just give them, we're going to make them over. They're going to realize they've been raised by these godly parents, and we're going to tell them that, that's your parents, and they were feeding you some lies. Sometimes they weren't telling you the truth, and we want you to know that the government, the king, can do just for you anything God could do. Well, so this was their idea. So we're going to, the main people I wanted to talk about this morning is Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael. Do you call that Michael? Is it Mishael? Remember their Judah names? I don't remember. It's spelled out.
Yeah.
Mishael. But anyway, in Jehovah, when they got to Babylon, and by the way, these 70 smart, young, good-looking, 4.0 average, all of them were smart. And so they went ahead. There were about 70 of them, and Daniel was probably one of the youngest, 14 and a half, 15, but they were old enough still to leave home, and probably their parents were wealthy because they had slaves and they'd been raised, with grace and able to go to all the schools. And so They trod probably, they went over 300 miles to Babylonia, and they walked. That's how far they had to walk to get there, because they were now prisoners of war, all these young men. You can imagine what their parents felt like whenever they saw their young kids just going off, especially the best of the best. So I'm going to move down just quite a few years later, in pre-World War II. Now, you all may have learned this in college. I mean, in high school, I did, and I can't. This is one thing I remember about Paris. All these brilliant people they loved to meet, and some of them were God-fearing people, and someone, you know, they were liberals. Let's say today what we would say. And so they met. These intellectuals and these philosophers would debate, and they really appreciated each other because they were all smart. But it got so, and they were already starting this in Paris. They decided finally, well, you know, we don't need to really listen to what they're saying. Really, what we're saying is most important. These are liberals, and so that just sort of was. I remember reading about these brilliant men. All of a sudden, they didn't have a lot in common, and they debated so much. This was in pre-World War II Paris. And now it goes on to say, just a quote from the book, that today from Harvard to modern Budapest, the bright young people of this generation debate the existence of God and the meaning of the human soul. This is what's going on today. This was in pre-war Paris, but it has just continued to grow. You know, what Hitler did, he wanted this perfect race, and so master race, and he started with young people too. Although he was smart enough, Hitler was, to go into all the Lutheran churches in Germany and get acquainted with the pastors and even speak at their churches. So a lot of people just bought everything Hitler said. He was a very smart man too. But also in this book I read that he was really so uncouth. And you didn't want to watch him when he ate, because he almost just stuffed everything in his mouth. He had no training in that, although he was a smart man. But what he wanted to do was to start with the youth, just like Nebuchadnezzar wanted to, and get this brilliant race, you see. And so this is what was going on. And I just want to quote this: the true believers in America and most other countries, it isn't just happening in America, it's happening in a lot of countries that have already start out socialism, what's next? Marxism, every time. And this is what's going on in America today. What's happening is the bright young people of this generation. I'm not just talking about America. I'm talking about many, many countries. This is just brand new to them too. But they debate the existence of God and the meaning of the human soul. And so this started off, now I've heard 20 years ago, but that might have been 10 years ago that I heard it, I can't remember. But this started in our, one of the big expensive universities called the
Harvard, Yale, are you talking about the Ivy League?
They started off in the Ivy League school where these parents have to pay $50,000 for tuition, maybe it's $100,000.
More than that.
Yeah, I'm sure it is now.
Way more than that.
Yes. But the thing of it is, they started in America, the really expensive universities, and they hired these atheistic teachers, and they began to teach these students that came in certain classes. Now, we want you, when you come here, to put everything aside that you've learned at home, because we're not sure your parents were teaching you right. And we want to let you know that not everything that they told you was good, and we want to show you the right way. But you know how it is in America. If you don't believe with people that are on this so very, very liberal, you are, what do they call us now? If you're not watching Fox News, you probably don't know. But anyway, if you're not, what are the
terrorists? Probably.
what?
We're a threat to society.
Yes, well, we are a threat. And I forget what they call all these people that they've already sucked in. But anyway, it's really sad. And I didn't know, even when I was teaching school, and the teachers union, even back when I started probably for
They
half.
call you an extremist or something?
Huh?
An extremist?
That's what they're doing now, yes. But I didn't know that the teachers union, even when I started school, we all had to join the teachers union, but I didn't know till I was probably halfway through my teaching career that the Democrats, every penny we paid to our union went to support the Democrats. And as someone, when I was finally realized what was going on, they started a different union if you didn't want to belong to the main one, which I went. But they may be all Democrat today because all the, I don't know if you've been watching news, they are really starting off now with preschool, kindergarten, and what of some of the books of the kindergartens I just couldn't believe. I read it in the newspaper, not the newspaper, heard on the news, that this one teacher, this was in preschool I think, or just maybe the first, was very, very young, and this one teacher went to this little girl and said, "We think you might want to join our little group." And she explained it to her that some of you children think you're a girl, and yet you have these tendencies. You feel like you're a boy, or maybe the other way around. Your parents think you're a boy, but and all of a sudden you think you're a girl. We want you to join our little club, so we can help you to decide. And so, and this was at the school. This was on the news. And this little girl went home. No, they did say, you don't need to tell your parents, about our little school. This is just between us. But she went home and told them everything. And that parent really threw a fit. She said, we're supposed to raise our own children. The school is supposed to teach them reading, writing, arithmetic. But anyway, I think that teacher finally got fired. But today it's ridiculous. The teachers union is behind all of this mess. Well, I'll read just this last couple lines here. The true believers here in America and most other countries, it's not just happening in America, are being subjected to a more subtle fashion than the Hitler Youth were. And see, Hitler was smart to know that he was going to have to start with these young people, all the Lutheran churches, and get them on his side. And I think when we saw so many that got on the Jews, because he was ready to get rid of the Jews because they were certainly not even belonged to the master race, even though many of the Germans were married to Jews. And all of a sudden they kind of noticed, well, what happened to that family? He was, she was a Jew and he was a German. What happened to them? They disappeared. That kept happening. And finally, someone got smart enough to realize that they were loaded up on cattle cars, and they thought they were finally, bless their hearts, they thought they were going to take them to another, location. And of course, they were taken straight to the what are they called? Yes,
concentration camps.
Yes, concentration camps. And they had to keep them in this concentration camps because they could only put so many people in a furnace at a time. And so they were just burning up these people. It was just a terrible, terrible thing. So the true believers here in America and most other countries are being subjected to a more subtle fashion than the Hitler Youth were. But the web of control is just as strong, and that's where it's happening here in America. Okay. And I think I've pretty well talked about the Nebuchadnezzar having these 70 young boys. They were just young kids, really. But he was smart enough to know if he got the brilliant youth over here, they could retrain them. And I think they probably did most. I don't remember if I read this in the book. But I know that Daniel and Hananiah and Michael and Jehovah, when they got to Nebuchadnezzar and Babylonia, they changed their name to the gods of their country, and so they were then renamed and went by those new names. Nebuchadnezzar understood the battle for the minds of the young, just as Hitler did, even though he decided the hostages from Judah, they really were brilliant. So he was starting at the top. Now in America, if you've been paying attention to the news, they start in pre-kindergarten now. And in preschool, kindergarten, and all the lower grades. And you would not believe some of the books that are in these children's libraries unless you've read about them. They just let them know that, quite possibly you think you're a boy, but maybe you're really a girl, so we just want to help you to understand, what the situation is. Okay, I want to make sure that I've gotten everything there I need. And by the way, whenever these 70 young men, Daniel and after they got moved, they were called Belshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so they had to walk over 300 miles to Babylon. And so, when they got there, they didn't know what they were in store for. But what they were going to be some of the king's magic men. I mean, just really men that could make things change. And so they had some older ones here. And so they brought in these 70 young men. And they all ate at the king's table. And Daniel, maybe just a few weeks of that, he told the other guys, Meshach, Abednego, and the other guy, Abednego,
Shadrach,
and
Meshach, and Abednego.
Yes, I tell you, I lose them. Anyway, they decided that they're going to, they're going to have to eat at the table and eat this uncouth food in what kind of was called kosher, not kosher. Yeah. And so Daniel said we should be doing this, and he was really, really, even as a youth, he just knew if God didn't told him not to do it, he wasn't going to do it. So, but they had already told. I don't know if the king told him this or the other man, but one of the most enjoyable things the king loved to do was to, if someone wasn't nice to him or didn't obey him, they liked to put this man on a spigot and set fire to him, and everybody, just watched him die. And I don't know if they all enjoyed it like the king did, but that was one of his most favorite things to do.
Watching a movie.
So,
Just need to turn around, yep.
okay, now then, the next thing, you all heard about Nebuchadnezzar's dream, probably when you were in Bible school, church. And so Nebuchadnezzar had this dream, and he called all these 70 young wise men, and the older ones too, and says, I want to tell you something. I've had a dream, and I don't need to tell me this yet. He said, I've had a dream, and I want you to tell me what it means, because I know it's a very important dream. And if no one can tell me, you're all going to die. Well, Daniel knew what his job was. He's going to have to start praying. But the interesting thing was that these men had no clue, But Daniel started praying and said, God, you're going to have to show me, because not only will they all die, but I'm one of them. And so finally, and Nebuchadnezzar did tell them that you'll all die if no one could interpret this dream for me. So finally God gave Daniel the dream. He almost always, he's just one of his special young men. And he told him what it was. And so Daniel went to the king and said, well, I can tell you what your dream was. So all these wise men came, and they were just really anxious to see what he was going to say the dream was. And so I imagine I can just see the king over here, and every one of these wise men watching him to see if it was really going to be interpreted as it really was. But what happened, he started telling exactly what this dream was. It was a big, big statue. Actually, it looked like the king. And he told about all the different people who were going to come and bring that country down. And so he asked God to give it to him, because he's going to be one that was killed if they didn't get an answer. Of course, God told him. And so he was beginning to tell, by the way, when he first told all these wise men, no one can interpret that dream, you're all going to die. And they said, well, we can interpret it, tell us what it was. And he said, well, that's just it, I can't remember it. And so they thought, well, we're done for.
What?
But nevertheless, Daniel was praying. And so sure enough, God told him what it was. So that's when he began to tell him about the statue. And I think it was the king, Nebuchadnezzar. And he started with the head, and it told all the different sand and mud and iron and steel, who were strong and who wasn't. And boy, they watched, I'm sure, the king's face as he was to see if that was the right interpretation. But sure enough, the king was just so relieved. And they were home free because Daniel was able to interpret that dream. And finally, one of the men said, "Look, King, why don't you build a statue of yourself just like the one in the dream?" Oh, he thought that was a wonderful idea, a very vain man. And so he had that statue built just like was told in the dream. So then another one person said, "Hey, I got a good idea." After that statue was built, and when it was being built, this guy said, "Why don't we have your musicians come out and play a certain song? Whenever that song is heard by anyone, they have to bow down and worship the king, the statue of the king." Well, they were pretty sure that when Daniel and his three friends, but you know what? I just found out in rereading this that Daniel was gone. This whatever they had this. He was off for business for the king, but the other three guys were there, and these men had watched them. They'd go to their apartment window here and pray, and they'd go over to this window and pray every day, and they didn't care, what anyone thought. They were praying to their God. And so Daniel, this one man who had said, "Let's build a statue," he finally said, "Let's bring the musicians out, and we play this special song that you choose, King. And when that's played, everybody has to bow down and worship the statue." Well, they knew that Daniel was gone, and so it was just Meshach, Abednego, and Shadrach. And the music started, and the guys were watching because they thought he won't do it. They won't, bow down while Daniel's gone. They'll just, they will stand it, or they'll be killed if they don't. But the thing was, they were surprised because they didn't bow down, and so now they get these three guys into the fiery furnace, and the king says, "Turn it up as high as it can go," and so they tied the wrist. This is one thing that I loved about this story, is the last scripture in this story in the Bible. But they tied their hands with ropes. And when they got inside, they threw them in, and then the fire was so hot that the three men that threw them in died right there, and they had to carry them off. And finally, after so long a time, someone went over there and looked in and said, "Didn't we just put three men in there?" They said, "Yes." He said, "I see four, and one looks like a god." Well, they were just, and so the king said, turn the fire off." When it cooled down, they opened the door, and the three young men walked out. And my favorite scripture in that whole story ends with him saying, "And they didn't even smell like smoke." And their little ropes had not been burned off. And
They weren't burned off. Their hands were still bound.
They're still bound. But I loved it that they didn't even smell like smoke. So now then, the Lord has seen them through several difficult times. And so now then they have decided that they're going to throw, let's see, the king was happy to have the fire turned up, and everyone was ready to throw them in the furnace, and they did that. And so what happened was Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego didn't bow down, and of course that's when they threw them in the furnace. Now the very last paragraph in this book, just summation, you see several apocalyptic visions, because Daniel, even at this was probably 500 or 600 years before Jesus was born, and Daniel even prophesied when Messiah, Jesus, would be born. He'd be born in a little town called Bethlehem, in a stable, all these different things. And when you read the Old Testament and all these prophetic words, you'll see them all walked out in the New Testament. It's just so amazing to me. Daniel served in the government there for over 60 years, and the people loved him because they knew he was a good man and what he did was going to work out. And then you have all these prophetic words from Daniel from the start when he went to Babylon. He got his first prophecy, a prophetic word as they were walking that 300 and some miles to Babylon. And so God blessed him. He worked 60 years for the government there. He was just a good man. Now then, what I wanted to say here in conclusion, if I don't know where it is, that Reinhard Bonnke, a lot of people, would read this and say, yeah, but that was, 500 years ago. Things are different now. No, things are not different because everything they predicted has come true, except just a very few things in Daniel. And that's one thing in this book you will find. I'm going to reread this again because it's just so amazing to me. But I want to tell you if you think, well, that was so many years ago, things are changed, and a lot of people, that's the argument that these people will give you when they think that America ought to be socialist. And there's never been a country that's ever been leaning towards socialism that it doesn't end in Marxism. And that's the thing. I'm telling you what, that's where we're heading. But I still think God saved Babylon. God saved Hitler paid for it. There were some really good people that didn't, that Hitler wasn't able to fool, but they realized they were going to have to kill this man, and so they planned for that, but it didn't work. They ended up themselves being killed. But I just wanted you to see, look at this. When Reinhard Bonnke was 9 years old, his daddy was a preacher, and he rode his bicycle to his church because he wanted to be there early. And so Baum went with the boys later to the church in their car. And this was after the mother and dad. They were raised in Germany too, and they were both in concentration camps. The mother with all the children, I believe there was 4 or 5, and the daddy over here by himself. So they had missed their dad for years. But anyway, now he's out. He's pastoring a church. And one day, when he was sitting with his mother in church, God spoke to him. And he was 9 years old, and God said, one day, when you grow up, you're going to go to South Africa and preach to many people. He knew God had said that. He knew God's voice. I don't know. That was the first time he'd ever heard God's voice, but he knew it was God. He could hardly wait for his daddy to come home on his bicycle. Sure enough, here he came, and he ran out to meet him. He said, "Daddy, you will never believe what God told me today in church." And he said, "Well, what did he tell you?" He told me, when I grow up, I'm going to be a preacher, and I'm going to South Africa, and I'm going to lead many people to the Lord. And his daddy said, "Oh, honey, I don't think God told you that when you were 9 years old. Besides that, your older brother will probably be the preacher in the family." And his daddy never did listen to him, and that little boy was so hurt, but he never changed. And this was Reinhard Bonnke. He never changed, doubted it. He always knew that was God speaking. Now, what I wanted you to do was just to look, and he spoke to over 1 million people just in one service. In fact, there is a picture of him in Nigeria with 1,600,000 people. All you have to do is look at the crowd, and you can see nothing but people. And that was at one service. I mean, people walked from all over Africa when they knew he was going to be here for any time, because they took their sick. And that's another thing. God had given him ability to heal people. So, yes, deaf ears or eyesight or crippled or sick or whatever. And that was, I know that still happens today. Certainly with Reinhard Bonnke, that's what drew the crowds. And what I've been noticing in the New Testament is and I love the New Testament, it's so exciting, starting with Matthew. Jesus, the first thing he did was beat people's knees. he didn't, start preaching immediately. He went out and met their needs. And one of the greatest things back then was delivering, demonic forces in people's lives. And you remember the one in the graveyard that everybody said, don't get near him. We put chains on him and everything else, and he is dangerous. And Jesus walked over, and one of the demons recognized who Jesus was, and he said, don't send us anywhere. Well, they saw a whole bunch of pigs out there eating, and send us into those pigs. So Jesus did. He said, all those, this man was full of all kinds of demons, and he sent them all in these pigs, and those pigs, you remember that story, how they all ran off the cliff and fell in the water below, and the people got awfully said Jesus, go somewhere else, please. But the thing of it is, everybody saw this man for the first time. They tried to, put chains on him and calm him or dress him. He never wore clothes and nothing, he never was able to get him to help him. But back then, he said, can I go with you? He had just completely, changed that man's life. He said, no, I want you to go home and tell people what God has done for you. And so that's what he did. And he gave Reinhard Bonnke this same gift. And I think some people do still have that today, but that's why people came. They knew they might be healed, and for whatever the disease was. It didn't always happen. But anyway, I just wanted you to look between these few little pages where these yellow pages are and see what a one night preaching to over 1 million people. I think it's 1,600,000 at this one place. And he didn't die. Reinhard Bonnke didn't die until that book was printed, and that book was printed in 2019.
Yeah, he just died a year or two.
Yes, and I remember seeing some of those revivals.
Yeah.
It was just amazing.
He always had huge crowds.
Yes, and he did finally get a tent. I think it held 10,000, but he finally had to quit that because it didn't hold the people. And if they could use those smaller tents if in just a certain area.
People like, how do you hear him?
Did they have speakers set up everywhere?
Yeah, yes, they had a lot, and this is technology of today, so they really could be.
This was 20 years ago, though.
Yeah.
Now.
And to me, that it was just so amazing because God gave Reinhard Bonnke this gift of healing, and everybody wanted to come and be healed, just like it was in Jesus' day. And then they started preaching to them. Of course, that's what a lot of people would come, even from northern Africa, and they would walk all for days to there. But anyway, that's why I wanted you all, if you hadn't read about the book of Daniel, it is so good. And I'm going to, like I say, I'm going to start it again because I think there are probably a few portions of it, but I think, well, I believe I know that. But you got to read it page by page, and it's so good. Okay, I'm sorry, how long was that?
It's 33 minutes.
Well, that's better. That's the best I've done. Usually I always get sidetracked.
Wait, you wait now? You wait.